So welcome everyone. We are preparing to live stream the meeting at this moment. And so today we're going to have a couple of pieces. So what I'm going to do is introduce everyone to our speakers, and then we're also going to I have a schedule here, which we're going to try and allocate a certain amount of time to some of the major aspects of the job market package, which in particular we know is going to be the cover letter, is going to be the research statement, and then we're also going to allocate a little bit a lesser time at the end of the day to the teaching statement and to the diversity statement, if that's okay with everyone. And so there's a couple of you, I see one or two of you where it looks like you may possibly have your mics on. Please make sure to mute yourself. All right. So thank you everyone for coming. My name is Kimberly Turner. I am a postdoc at, of course, they started leaf blowing the minute I started speaking. I am a postdoc at Harvard University and Brown University's Watson Institute, and I will be an assistant professor at University of Pittsburgh's Graduate School of International Affairs, International Public Affairs next year. So today we have an awesome panel which is designed to try and prep you as you're going into the AppSub Meet market or as you're preparing for your job applications, discussing the various portions of the job market packet, and answering any particular sort of questions you may have. In particular, answering questions about how do I prepare this for a R1 versus a SLAC? How do I make sure that I present my teaching forward and as an integral part of your application? And so I'm really honored to have on this panel today 3 awesome presenters who are going to discuss these topics. First and foremost, you have Brooke Shannon at University of Pittsburgh, was a new assistant professor there. We have Lindsay, I'm about to mess your name up, my apologies.
Mayka.
From Colby College, and Dr. Shamira Gelbman from Wabash College. So thank you, everyone. I appreciate these panelists being here. And what we're going to do today is we're going to start talking about the cover letter. And Lindsay, if you would start talking about, and then Shamira, you go first, second, and then Brooke, if you'll go afterwards. I appreciate that.
All right, looking for the technology of how to do this. Okay. All right, I think that should work now. Hi, okay, so thank you, Kimberly, for bringing us all together. My name is Lindsay Mayka. It's how you pronounce it. I'm at Colby College, and so I am coming from a perspective of being somebody who's at a liberal arts college with strong relationships with students, strong focus on teaching, but also kind of high expectations for research that sort of balances the two. And so that is how I think of what you should be doing in a cover letter, showing the balance. I think the first thing I would say before starting this is that it's not like there's exactly a formula that you need to follow, and you can do everything right and have it not work out for you because the job market is brutal and we get like 30 people who are almost equally talented at like the top that we could hire. But there are some pitfalls that people make that could get them dinged and eliminated in a way that we wouldn't be able to see what their strengths, right? And I wanted to make sure that all the students or all the candidates who have all these strengths that we can actually get to the point where we see what those strengths are. So I know that we're going to cover a lot of things, but I think I need to start with saying that I think the most important thing is having, honestly, like strong topic sentences. I don't personally think that it's a terrible thing if you go onto the 3rd page. I know it's breaking the rule, but if you had paragraphs that I can skim easily, that helps me know, oh, I want to read this more, right? And so if you do that in a way, like that's more important, I think, so making sure it's really clear what your strengths are, and communicating with people in a way that you should assume that, first of all, obviously, people, like if you're applying for a liberal arts college, you're probably going to be the only one in your area, right? So I do Latin American politics. Nobody else is going to do Latin American politics. We have other comparativists, but nobody else does Latin American politics. But beyond that, there's not just going to be comparativists on the search. There would be like colleagues in theory and IR. And so you want to think about, why do we care about your research when you communicate about it? Think about it as the way that you would be talking to undergrads, and kind of like getting back to what first made you really interested in political science. Like, why is this cool, right? Not just, oh, this adds to this niche debate or this specific contribution. I think that a lot of times what we're looking for is people who have research that's just kind of interesting, and that we would like to talk to them about, and that when they talk about it with students, they would get the students excited. So Kimberly, I don't know how much time I have. I feel like I maybe should move it on to the next people, but I think that's the thing of, think about who you're speaking to, and think about how to just make yourself sound interesting, and down to kind of like think about why you came into political science in the first place.
That was perfect timing, Lindsay. Yes, if we'll try and keep it to about 3 to 4 minutes each, that's perfect. And for those of you who are on Spaces, apparently it closed, so I'm going to try and reopen it again. My apologies.
Hey, do you want me to go ahead? Okay, so I'm Shamiri Gelbman. I am the chair of the political science department at Wabash College, which is a small liberal arts college for men in Crawfordsville, Indiana. I've been here 10 years. We have done a lot of hiring over those 10 years, a lot of visiting positions. We hire a lot of sabbatical replacements, but I've been on searches for tenure track positions as well. And we're actually in the process of one in international relations. I also spent a few years and served on a search committee at a large state university, not a flagship, not an R1, and can probably speak a little to that. I would say for the cover letter, I think one of the big problems I see, or one of the things I think is challenge, it's a difficult genre, I would say. And they can sometimes come across as kind of an essay rather than a letter of application for a job, right? And I think that the job ad should be your primary guide, right, for what to emphasize and what to write about in the letter. So if the job ad calls for kind of specific qualifications, tweaking your kind of letter template to those, and speaking directly to what the job is calling for can be really important. I think there's sometimes a tendency to almost write the cover letter like you're writing your personal statement that you wrote when you applied to graduate school. And so you talk about things like, these are the faculty I want to work with, that sort of thing. And this is not really that, right? This is more of a, here's why I want to be a faculty member at your institution. And sure, you'll probably do some collaborating with people here, but you're not really coming to work under anyone's supervision or be advised by any specific faculty members. And so really thinking more about what you bring to the table as far as what your qualifications are for the position, I think that's really important. We're probably slightly less research intensive than Colby, but research is important here as well. And I think when people apply for Slack positions, there can be a tendency to downplay research too much, or to, well, I think you can kind of go in either direction, right? Downplay it or overplay it. And I think finding a good balance where you're explaining clearly and not in a patronizing way what your research is, and in some detail how you do it. But then also that's about a third of the letter, right? A third. And the rest of the letter should really go into detail about your teaching credentials and your service and anything else you bring to the table in response to what the ad is calling for.
Brooke, if you would like to go ahead and start.
Sure. So hello again, my name is Brooke Shannon. I'm a first-year assistant professor at University of Pittsburgh's Policy School, known as the Graduate School of Public and International Affairs, or GISPIA. So my perspective, again, first year, first semester, like second month. So I'm not going to speak from the perspective of someone who's been on a committee, because I have not. But what I will say is offer some tips for folks who are compiling their materials and getting ready for the market. Something that I found very helpful was to ask around. So not only for people who had graduated and were successful on the market from my department, but people that I had met at conferences, people in my network, like folks that I knew specifically study things different from me, because I wanted to see what people put into a cover letter. What I envision a cover letter as, I think that was really helpful from Shamira, especially to talk about like, this is not an essay. We all have those skills maybe as academics. And so applying for a job and doing a cover letter for like a career is difficult writing for us because it's outside of our wheelhouse maybe. But something that I found really useful in this is that almost like building block, not formula, but building block for a cover letter to almost summarize the things that are in your other statements, right? So like, number one, this is why I'm a good fit for this job. This is who I studied under, maybe even, and like what my work, the intersections of my work, or like the disciplines that I speak to. And then moving on to like why you want to work at this specific school. Something that I did for every cover letter, I had a template for Slack, for policy schools, for RET, and for American institutions. And I highlighted the paragraph that was like, I want to work in Pittsburgh because I want to do civic engagement work. I love community organizing. That's where my background is. And I'm really interested in working with students who are master students or PhDs in public administration, local governance, like a place where that kind of work is already happening. And that's how I can contribute, right? Other applications looked different. Other cover letters like summarized that differently. And I also included one of the last paragraphs of every cover letter included from the website, from the curriculum, from the course schedule. These are the classes that I'm qualified or that I'm looking forward to teaching as a way to like fit into the department. So I want to echo again what Shamira said about who you want to study with or who you want to work with. I think that seems irrelevant, but definitely like I can teach Congress, I can teach judicial politics, I can teach institutions, like, and giving the names of the courses perhaps that are offered. And I would love to offer these additional courses. I think that kind of thing is pretty helpful for a cover letter to sum up like what you will bring to the department as a colleague.
Can I add
Awesome.
like one thing
Absolutely. Go ahead.
to this that it's really helpful to hear other people. I would say to build on what Shamira was saying, I'll give a specific example of what that would look like. So if we say we're looking for somebody who can teach American political institutions and methods, you should say in your cover letter, I can teach methods, right? Say that because we're going to be looking through as like a checklist of, do they meet the job requirements, right? And so make sure you do that. And if you're somebody who is maybe kind of like a little bit on the border between subfields, make sure you're really communicating, like if it's a comparative IR job, right? You might say, okay, my work spans this, but here's the experience I have with international relations. I have taught it. I've submitted to this, something like that, that will sell you as an IR person, because somebody might look at you and be like, oh, wait, is this really just somebody who's a comparativist who doesn't fit? So just make sure that when you're looking through that you don't give anyone a reason to question whether you should be applying for the job. And then one of the things that I forget who, but somebody mentioned about, I think it was you, Brooke, that somebody asked me this about like, what is the research statement compared to the cover letter? And I don't know if people agree with this, but I was thinking of it as like, well, the cover letter is kind of the executive summary of the different pieces of your thing. So you can, I read like the 2 paragraphs or whatever about your research, be like, oh, that's interesting. And they're kind of at this broad level that I can get it at 2 paragraphs. And then I say, I want to learn more to figure out like what that actually looks like. And then I read the research statement. And so that can help you think about like, what are the purposes of the different documents. And just the last thing I'd say, don't underestimate how quickly we read these things. Like we go back, we try to be careful, but just make sure that it's really easy for us to see how you fit and your strengths.
This was perfect timing. Thank you, three of you. And I'm going to use the moderator privileges here to say just the advice that Lindsay just gave you regarding the cover letter. One of the pieces of advice I had given was that the cover letter should be who you are as a scholar. And then they can read more in depth about who you are in terms of your research, your teaching, your dedication to diversity within the various statements, but it should be one page, that 2 pages or so, that basically tells them exactly who you are as a scholar and what you're going to bring to their department. And so these sort of easy topic sentences that Lindsay's talking about, they should be able to skim and understand really quickly what sort of research are you bringing to the table, what sort of teaching you bring it to the table, et cetera, without having to sort of wade through the weeds of it. So, and so with that, we're going to go ahead and transition into the research statement. So let's stay with our same sort of schedule that we had before. So if Lindsay, if you'll start us, well, do you want to wait and we'll rotate to Shamir instead, Lindsay?
Yeah, could we? Because I'm finding
Absolutely.
that when they say these things, I get like, oh yeah, that's a really good point.
I saw you looking down, so yes. Shamira, do you mind starting us off then?
Sure. So we don't actually ask for a separate research statement in any of our ads, or so far we haven't. We do ask you to discuss your research in the cover letter, and we do ask for a sample of your research, so a dissertation chapter or a recent publication. That said, I'll speak a little bit to what we look for in your cover letter discussion of research. So we're a teaching focused liberal arts college. The teaching load for practically everyone here is 3.3. And so so a lot of your job is teaching, but you can't get tenure here without publishing some research. And in a tenure track search, we are looking at people who have an active publication pipeline, right? We're not really counting publication so much as looking at, do you have a viable path to publishing a few things as you go up through the tenure track here through those first 6 years on the job. So I think indicating on your CV where your working papers stand, right? If they are beyond the point of just a draft on your desktop, right? If they're under review, if they've received an R&R, kind of where things are, so that we have a sense of your pipeline. We want you to describe your research in a way that is accessible and interesting to a group of faculty who are not in your subfield. We're a department of 5. The only subfield that has 2 of us is American politics, because we've got a lawyer who teaches con law classes for us. And so if we're hiring tenure track and IR, that means we have no one in IR who's going to be reading that file. And so you want to really explain your research in a way that, again, doesn't dumb things down, but is accessible to everyone. We're looking for your ability to communicate your research effectively, because you're going to have to do that to some undergraduates, to colleagues in other disciplines, to administrators who are not political scientists by training. That'll all come at the interview stage, but we're looking for your evidence that you can do that already in the cover letter. And finally, we do have a pretty good financial support for research, and we want to get a sense of how you're going to spend that money. Are you going to be traveling to do your research? Are you going to be buying access to survey respondents? You don't need to say, here's how I'll spend the money, but we do want to get a feel from your description of how you conduct your research. We want to get a feel for where our money is going to go, what sort of activities it's going to fund, and also what sorts of research approaches you can help our students learn once you're here.
Brooke, if you'd like, go ahead and go next.
Of course, in true Brooke fashion, I'm taking notes on all of the things that y'all say as well. So I want to get this in before I forget, but it's a general helpful thing, I think, for folks on the job market for all of your materials, is along with like the complementary stuff of like your scholarly website that you should have, Twitter was invaluable for me in terms of feedback. So the general rule, I feel like, for research that we tell each other all the time is get feedback early and often. And what I did on Twitter was say, hi, I'm willing to give feedback on I would love to like read and give feedback on your materials if you'll do the same for me. And the folks that I worked with were Latin Americanists. They were people on a European market. They were IR folks. And I didn't read a single job market packet that was Americanist or like urban politics. So it was really valuable for me to have feedback from people whose like first language wasn't English and people who had no idea what I was talking about if I were to like dive too deeply into the like minutia of a paper, for example. So that was really helpful. And I definitely encourage you as a way to build up a network of folks on the market and some solidarity with people who are in the same drudgery as you are if you're on the job market. So that's really helpful. Get a Twitter and start following people and help people and let them help you. So I am fortunate in that at the University of Texas, I worked with the Policy Agendas Project, which has like a succession of leadership every 2 years. So I had a Dropbox folder of job market materials from the last like 4 or 5 project managers of the PAP. So I had all of those research statements available. And then from all the people that I asked in person, people I had been in conference panels with, as well as in Twitter, I compiled like a list of subtitles that were found in all of the research statements that I thought were very helpful. And in terms of this like formula, right, and how to build your formula or your research statement, everybody had a beginning that started with current research, which was like research agenda, research area, and then went into their dissertation project, a few paragraphs there, and then future research directions is how everyone ended that. So that includes turning your dissertation into a book, whether or not you'll be spending the first 2 years of your tenure track position doing that, possible and potential pipeline collaborations, even that you have going already, collaborations with other scholars, and other articles that you are working on potentially, like some ideas that you have for the future, what you hope to work on, whether or not you hope to work and publish with students, things like that. So that seems to be, in terms of like continuity for what helped me build my statements, that was really helpful to focus on like the agenda, the dissertation, and then the future project.
That's great. There is actually a formula, and I hadn't really thought about that. So one thing I'll say, it's a little bit mirroring what I said for the cover letter, that topic statements matter, but also section headings I think are really useful because it's like a topic statement of all your topic statements. And so that way I can see, oh, you know, here's Brooke Shannon's thing. She's talking, okay, here's where she's talking about future research. Here's where she's talking about the dissertation project. And especially if I'm, you know, like more interested in one of them, I can kind of jump to that, or I can just see how these all fit together. I think that's really useful for helping us be able to process the material. Going off of one thing that Shamira said about if like having a list of like, here are 10 working papers I have, I don't know what to do with that. If you have not published, and it does happen that people do get hired without being published, including myself. I know it seems like it's impossible. You need, you know, 3 APSRs to do it, but it can happen. But if you have something at least under review, something to show that you're not going to be a person who just, you know, is there for 7 years and still doesn't publish anything, but it's just that, yeah, you're early in your career. That helps to kind of show some direction and that you've been presenting at conferences. In terms of the length, I think it's, again, okay if you go on to the 3rd page, as long as you have those section headings. But the thing I would also say is don't go into too much detail if you haven't done a ton of stuff yet, right? Like somebody who has published a whole bunch and is a different stage in their career, like logically would have, you know, a 3-4 page research statement, you know, like, so kind of just think like, am I trying to pad this too much here? I think one thing that I would just be interested in hearing from other people, I've never really understood if there is much of a difference. Like, since I am at a liberal arts college, and that is mostly the people when I was in the market who were interested in me were policy schools and liberal arts colleges. And I don't know if there is a difference for a research statement for an R1 versus not. It may be for a place like Shamir is talking about, where you're kind of thinking like maybe you do want to bring in student research or something like that for some of them. So I don't even know if there is a difference there. But the part that I mean, because I just in general think that what you want to do in any job packet is communicate who you are, and people at R1s also like may not be up to date on everything in your field. But I think to think about with that it's not necessarily for every paper that you have a 2-sentence summary of the paper, right? That can just get like boring and feel like I'm reading like a slightly annotated CV. And I'm more thinking, here are the big debates that I'm contributing to. And you might say, you know, I have 2 papers, one that focuses on this in the health sector and one that focuses on this in education, that look at this kind of question, right? And then I can kind of go back to the CV and figure out maybe what those are, or maybe I don't even need to process it at that minute level of a detail. So I think that is a part of it, of thinking about like somebody just sitting and reading and trying to figure out what questions you're interested in and how you approach it.
Sorry, you should have been recording from the beginning. I don't know why that just happened. Thank you, Zoom, for interrupting. Lindsay, did you still have anything else you wanted to say? Sorry.
I'm sure I will think of something in 10 minutes, but I think that's okay.
Okay, so my apologies. I'm going to take moderator privileges again for a couple of you on I see in here. I know some of you may be interested in postdocs. And the postdoc cover letters and research statements are similar, but a little bit different. So in a postdoc letter, if you're going to be doing those in addition to your tenure track applications, they really want to see what a section on your research statement that talks about what you plan on accomplishing during your time there. And they need some sort of solid deliverables. So you don't want to say, I'm going to be writing 3 books, what have you, because you can't do that within the space of a 1 to 2 year postdoc. So rather they're interested in knowing, are you going to be writing, you know, you plan on writing the book, so it's prepared to go up for a book proposal or a book workshop the following year. Do you plan on writing an article in the spring or article in the fall, and that you want to prep maybe syllabi for your upcoming teaching position, if you have one, if you're lucky to have one, to walk into. So a little bit more concreteness about exactly what you plan on contributing to their institute or center during the time period that you're there, and the deliverables in terms of research that you plan on doing that will actually have their name on it when you submit it in for publication. So with all that, thank you guys. We keep it on wonderful track. Let's move over to the teaching statement, which I know definitely has some variations probably between R1s and Slacks. And I'd love to hear your opinions on that. Brooke, we'll start with you.
Cool. So again, I'm here with the tips for folks on the market as someone who just started teaching. So my background before grad school was in teaching in several ways. I was a high school teacher and like a facilitator for community organizing workshops. So I had like an idea of what I wanted to communicate, but something that is really helpful, I think, for people, even or especially people who haven't taught their own class, which I think is pretty common for PhDs, is to ask teachers and in your department. So I think all of us, in terms of all of us being graduate students, have had these experiences with professors who are very brilliant and whose research is like top tier and maybe even like defines their field, but they're like the worst teachers in the world. And so I think thinking about those types of lessons, where for me it's difficult to sit in a class and not think like, wow, that was awesome, I can't wait to do something like that, or like, this is not working and here's how I wish this class was being taught. If you've ever thought about that, like, I think maybe you should include that kind of thing in your teaching statement, not the trash talk, but definitely the like, I value this and this is how I would like to do something, or like, I will provide short assignments because I think it's important for X, Y, and Z, right? There are probably teachers in your school, if not your department, that have won teaching awards. So I would start there by asking them about their teaching philosophies. I have a teacher in my PhD department at UT Austin who was a fantastic teacher. And I believe, and I think he would say this too, it's because his sister is a second grade teacher. And in the first day of class, he says, I want to make this 250 person class feel like there's 25 people here. And he does it every time. And so I talked with him. I asked him if we could have a meeting, and I asked him, like, what are the things that you do? What are the teaching tactics? Because I know this isn't just like natural. And I also ripped off his teaching philosophy with permission in my teaching statement, where I wanted to have continuity throughout and explain like why I thought teaching was important, give the skills gained from outside experiences where folks have not been high school teachers. I think like if you've ever been like a camp counselor, if you've ever led like Outward Bound or even like managed the store, I think that you can provide lessons from things like that and say like, I know that, you know, this type of thing would translate well into a classroom, like this type of skill that I learned as a camp counselor. And I think that a teaching statement, there's a little bit of room for saying that. In my background, I've managed teams of people, et cetera, right? And this is how I will incorporate these lessons into teaching. I think that to include also short descriptions of courses that you want to teach in the future, particularly again for grad students who haven't been instructors themselves, is really important. And if there are any teaching portfolio requirements for these applications where they ask for evaluations or syllabi, keep them continuous, like keep some continuity in your packet. So in your teaching statement, speak to those courses, either that you have taught or that you want to teach, and that will be a little bit more streamlined, especially because like Lindsay said, like don't overestimate the time people have to look through your stuff. So I think to keep it like short and sweet always, and to keep it like on message is incredibly useful there.
I'll go next. Brooks, that is such a great point about returning to some of the courses. And I think that's really helpful because people will remember it if you mention it like cover letter and then you come in here. I think that's really useful. So let's see. So I have a couple of different things. This is possibly too late for a lot of people here, but if you can teach a course on your own, please try to find that opportunity to do that. It is very important at a lot of liberal arts colleges. Might be too late for now, but it could be something to think about, you know, in the future of like maybe a summer class or something like that. But one thing I sometimes when I'm reading applications, I kind of struggle with is figuring out, okay, somebody was a TA. What did that mean? Like I went to Berkeley and TA'd for 9 different semesters, and TAing, like I learned and then I taught one course on my own over a summer, and I knew way more about teaching from TAing than I did from the course that I taught on my own, because there was a lot of stuff that went into classroom management and grading and just I like designed little assignments, and there was so much that translated over. And then I think in some places, in particular places that call it a teaching fellow, it is not quite the same thing. So really highlight if you're learning a lot of these classroom management skills, how that came out. Let's see. There's another piece that's kind of going off of some of what Brooke said, that we all know the huge problems with evaluations. Okay. Having said that, if a school asks you to include the evaluations, you know, this is not your time to protest and not invest in it. You should include in there a bit of a narrative about what the evaluations are, and maybe refer back to things from your evaluations. And so I think Shamira in her Twitter feed that we did a while back maybe mentioned this, but that if you have a point about like, I use simulations, and I think the simulations are really important to get students thinking in terms of the incentives of the actors. And then you had a quote from an evaluation that said, I never really understood like the pressures that the military was facing until I did the simulation. Like, that's great. Like, that's golden. That's a good way of bringing evaluations in to clarify what you're doing. And the other thing is that there's so many buzzwords that we see, and everyone's like, everyone really supports active learning and critical thinking. So, and, you know, like there's a lot of buzzwords, especially when you talk about pedagogy. I want to see what that looks like, you know, in your class, right? And so if you say, oh, I try to bring out, you know, all kinds of students so that everyone feels comfortable in the classroom. So talk about really specific strategies, maybe even give an example of a specific student or a specific classroom, like giving something to be like, okay, back when I taught, you know, intro IR, I faced this challenge because there were 100 students in the class. And then here's what I did in this specific assignment or this specific class session to bring more people in, right? Like something like that, that I can kind of picture it, I think is really useful. And then I agree that having a list of classes and just if it's not a full description, like a couple of sentences about what that would look like, especially if you have been at a place like I was at Berkeley where I taught lots of stuff that does not necessarily indicate all my strengths. And so what classes that you TA'd are not necessarily what you want to teach. So make sure that we know, boom, here's what they would bring. Like, because for a liberal arts college, you don't need to go in necessarily and find exactly the courses that are being offered. We might, you know, like we might want you to cover some basic things, but if somebody else is teaching something, I don't know, like I wouldn't overanalyze being like, oh, I have to fill this specific course or that one's taken. Just talk about if you're talking about electives, things that you would bring that would be your strengths. And then the last thing I would say is that
we're up against time.
1 second. The last thing I would say is that I appreciate seeing a discussion of diversity, not just in a diversity statement, but also in a teaching statement, because I think that it is an essential part of pedagogy in general about how you create a classroom that is inclusive to everyone. And it should go beyond, I just treat everyone the same. Okay.
All right. So I want to reiterate Lindsay's point about buzzwords, and I'm kind of reminded of back when I was on the job market for the first time many years ago. And I happened to be meeting with my undergrad advisor and was talking about, you know, getting my job market materials ready. And he was like, oh, what are you going to write in your teaching statement? I said, oh, I'll just talk about critical thinking. And he was like, so what are you going to say about critical thinking? And that was kind of a wake-up call of like, don't just toss the buzzwords around, right? Be ready to say what they mean to you, how you actually apply them in concrete ways in your teaching. We do ask for a separate teaching statement. It's actually the only separate statement we ask for with our applications. We call it a statement of teaching philosophy. I think what that means is we want to hear your sense of your goals as a teacher of political science. So what are you hoping to accomplish? What are you hoping your students will accomplish through your teaching? And a sense of how you work to achieve those goals. So what are your approaches to course design, to working with students? I think we tend to think of course design as coming up with reading lists. And I think you want to think more broadly than that and think about the experience students are going to have in your courses. What are they going to do more than what are they going to read? Right. We want to hear from, so I just quickly glanced at my email to see what I just sent my colleagues as kind of reminder of these are the things we look for, right? We look at teaching experience, and I think that's been covered pretty well. Teaching effectiveness, we don't actually do standardized teaching evaluations here. And so telling us, well, I'm an effective teacher because my scores have been consistently above the department average doesn't really mean anything to us. We want to hear what you've done and why you think what you've done has worked effectively. We also look for people who are reflective teachers, right? So what you've learned from some of your experiences as a teacher and how you've used that learning to improve. We're thinking you're going to come here and join an interdisciplinary community of teachers, right? We have many opportunities here on campus for you to talk to colleagues in different fields about teaching strategies and philosophies and whatnot. And we want to know what you're going to contribute to those conversations. I would say the strongest teaching statements are the ones where I read them and I'm like, oh, I can learn from this person if they come here. They're gonna bring some really interesting ideas and experiences to the table. And so the more you can kind of play that up, the better. And then you can put this in the cover letter and or the teaching philosophy statement, as long as it appears somewhere. Your teaching interest, what courses you're interested in teaching, both the ones you've already taught and the ones you're eager to design. And we look for range here. And ideally range that doesn't overlap with what we already have in our current faculty. So if we're hiring in IR, as we are now, we're looking for someone who will teach broadly in the IR subfield, because you will be the only one here teaching international relations courses. And so giving us kind of, well, I would teach these 3 courses and they're kind of 3 different versions of your dissertation. That's not going to sell as well as kind of giving us a 5 courses, right? And maybe one of them is not obviously within your dissertation comfort zone, but it tells us you're someone who's kind of thought more broadly about the IR subfield and your willingness to cover courses within that. What we do not want to see is a long list of methods courses. We're interested in your ability to contribute to our methods courses, but we're just not going to offer 10 different stats courses here, right? It's not what we do in a political science department at a very small liberal arts college. And kind of telling us that your teaching interests center on advanced statistics courses tells us that's probably not going to be a great fit for what we need in our department. Someone who can teach maybe a basic stats course or an intro to research design, or can supervise senior seminar projects, but then is mostly interested in teaching substantive political science courses. I know we're tight on time, so I'll just stop there because there's a lot I could say about teaching.
Awesome. And we're going to have time for Q&A, so people can also follow up and ask more specific questions. The audience members can. And then last but not least, we're going to finish this off with Brooke discussing the diversity statements.
Yeah, so real quick, I wanted to touch on what are now being called the JEDI statement. Instead of DEI, right, the Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion statement. And for me, this is about pushing past equity towards justice. So thinking about students in your class who, of course, like when we talk about diversity statements, I think most people immediately think about racial diversity, but there's a lot of different non-traditional students that you may interact with. Me being at a policy school, something that is very clear is diversity in age, diversity in background for students coming to get a master's degree, right? So what I would like to stress is that I want to make this generalizable, because I do believe everyone has something to contribute to this. Just because like you're a white cis dude from the suburbs doesn't mean you should not be thinking about diversity in your classroom, because you will have diverse students, even if you feel you are not diverse, whatever that means. So when I was in my second year, I believe, a student who was on the market, who is a cis white man, took me out for coffee and said, as a woman of color, what would you like to go back? And like, what would you prefer? What would you expect for a man who was your professor? Like, what can I do to help, I guess, or to acknowledge and support women of color in my classes? And so we talked about things like resource and access, being maybe more open about saying, have you thought about grad school? Can we use work together to improve this paper for a writing sample, perhaps for grad school, right? Making sure that you're thinking about giving free access to articles and PDFs and stuff like that. Doing assignments where if you're doing a quiz, you only use a half sheet of paper, so people don't have to always have full sheets of paper, right? Things like that, noticing that there's a lot of diversity in class and wealth and students working outside of school to pay rent, things like that contribute in a diversity statement. So in mine, I talked a lot about that I am a pretty non-traditional looking academic. I'm brown, I'm first generation, I'm heavily tattooed, right? So I started to notice as a TA that all of the people of color, especially women of color, were coming to my office hours and not to the professors. And they were talking about, I'm not as smart or knowledgeable as people who talk a lot in political science classes. I don't know, things like this, right? And so those are the students that I was pretty adamant in, like, let me help you all write a letter of recommendation. Are you interested in grad school? Like, what do you see after graduation? I'm happy to report that 2 of those students, one of them won an APSA fellowship for diversity and got all of his PhD applications paid for. Another student, I just got an email last week that she accepted an offer for law school. So that kind of stuff works, right? If you put it into practice, again, it's generalizable. You should be talking to all of your students about their lives, but putting extra oomph and listening a little extra to students who are from non-traditional backgrounds is really key. And that includes students who have different backgrounds at home, people who are parents, students who are veterans, right? The diversity of thought is pretty key in political science classrooms as well. So there are a lot of options. There was something floating around Twitter a couple weeks ago about someone put a statement, like a 5-step statement for parents in the class, should they need to like bring a baby to class for their feeding timing, or if like their childcare fell through, like don't feel like you need to miss class because your babysitter can't make it. So I included that in my syllabus this year, and I've already had a student reach out to me to say thanks and say, like, my experience as a parent, I've always felt like I wasn't serious as a student if I had something come up, and my professors made me feel like that way. So thinking about that, right, adding things in your syllabus as you walk students through on the first day, talking about the free and research resources on campus in the library, things like that, that establish like a base vocabulary for students who might not know this kind of stuff is really helpful. And I think that is what demonstrates a commitment to this like Jedi statement. So put that kind of stuff. If you're, again, like a white person who feels like you're not diverse, this is what I think the benefit of a diversity statement is. That's all I'll say.
That was amazing. Thank you. So at this moment, we've kind of run up against time. So I want to open up the forum to our great amount of participants who are there. Thank you, audience. If you will raise your hand and ask the specific, that way I can unmute you and you can ask the specific question that you have, that's great. If you want to put it into the chat instead, that is also acceptable. So I do want to open up the floor in this time period for people to raise their hands. In the meantime, I wanted to invite Lindsay or Shamir, if you wanted to expand a little bit more on the diversity statement aspect.
Oh, I just put a thing in
the
chat that is, I love everything Brooke just said. And I know that when I was applying, so I'm a woman, I guess that makes me whatever in political science, and I'm also first gen. So I had some of those things, but I really think, so we do want to diversify our faculty, but it's also very deeply important that if we have a white candidate or a candidate who has some of these other privileged backgrounds, like thinking about what you're going to do, right? Like, it's not just enough. We're not looking for like, oh, what are you? We're looking for what are you doing, right? Like, if you have some of that background, that is going to help you, as Brooke said, like the students are going to come to the faculty of color. But just thinking like, how do you make yourself to be a person who they would come to, and making it more than just like, I, treat my students equally. I create an environment where everyone's welcome. Like, you have to take proactive steps to make a classroom and a college truly inclusive. It can't just be, equity or treating everyone equally. So.
Yeah, I would echo that. We don't have a separate diversity statement, but we ask it to be addressed in the ad, right? It's in there as a qualification for the job. And increasingly, I think it's become a normal part of the cover letter, right? People discuss diversity, and I think authenticity shows, right? And I think, like the teaching statement, it's obvious, I think, when you're just throwing buzzwords around, as opposed to giving us a real concrete sense of who you are and what you bring to the table, as far as your work in the diversity, equity, and inclusion field.
So we don't have any questions yet, so I'm going to take this opportunity to throw my 2 cents in. Actually, Trevor has a question, so I'm going to stop. Trevor, I'm going to unmute you and ask you to unmute, and please go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you. And thank you, everyone. I've learned a ton today and it's been very useful. I apologize. I can't remember who the very first speaker was, but you mentioned that the most common thing you see in cover letters are certain things that are pitfalls rather than things that make you stand out as being better, but certain things that, automatically, put you in the no pile or detract from your cover letter. And I was wondering if you could just expand a little bit on what some of those pitfalls could be.
Yeah, great. That was me. So I mentioned this later on, but that you're not specifically saying, while my
Hold on a second,
research-
Trevor.
Oh.
Hold on a second.
Yes?
We have multiple people talking.
Oh,
I'll make sure I'm muted. I'm sorry.
okay. It was the thing like not saying I can teach intro IR when a search looks for that. It would be students who talk about, sorry, not students, applicants who talk about being excited about working with PhD students at a liberal arts college. Shamira said, like, if you're listing potential courses, having there be like multiple courses that are like machine learning and whatever, right? Like maybe machine learning could be a cool January course for us, but like something that makes it look like you don't understand. Or the other one for us would be any candidate who writes a letter that is research, and then one paragraph on teaching. So Shamir and I had gone back and forth on some of this. I hesitate to be like, oh, there's a formula of like, this kind of school needs 60%, this kind of school needs 40%. But like, there are people who turn in things that have just one paragraph on teaching. And like, that's bad. For a school like us, I don't care if research or teaching is first. I would usually put research first, but for other kinds of institutions, they want teaching first. But I don't know if that is a veto thing. Can you guys think of other things that would be vetoes?
I think for us, just very limited teaching range would be a veto. Right? Like if it's like, I would teach the intro and one upper level course and substantive course, and then a bunch of method stuff like that. We really are looking for range and showing that you don't really get that when we emphasize it in the ad, I think would, but otherwise I agree with Lindsay. Those are the things that, yeah, any sign that you don't get that this is an undergraduate institution.
I actually am even okay if you put the wrong name of the school, like later on, like if everything is the same and then like in the last paragraph, you accidentally slip in the wrong name. But some people, like I know you guys have so many applications you're putting together, but yeah, things that are like, you don't get it as opposed to you broke this rule. And I don't care that much about typos as long as they're not flagrant.
So I can speak to Juan's question about, I think it's fine to say you're qualified to teach it. I think what you want to avoid doing is saying—
Shamir, will you say what the question was?
Oh, sure. It's a question in the chat. So it says, say an ad for comparative IR says the candidate should also be able to teach American. Which I have never solo taught, but have TA'd. Is it okay to say you're qualified to teach the American politics based on the TAing experience, or does it look a bit lame? I think it wouldn't hurt you to say it's a course you're qualified to teach. And it could help us out in a pinch one year if someone has to go on sudden leave and we need someone to cover the intro to American politics. But I don't think you want to lead with that, right? It could be in the list of courses, but I think focus on what the job is about, right? I'd maybe list that as a teaching interest in your CV rather than in the cover letter.
But Wendigo, for you, I wouldn't apply to any position that's looking for Americanists. Like, don't waste your time on things that like that is the first thing. If somebody is just not in the field, the field's too deep now.
So if I may, I've just been finding some positions that it's clearly a comparative ad. Like they're so even as specific as to say comparative politics of Latin America. And at some point in the ad, it says, and by the way, this candidate should also be able to, at some point, teach our American politics class.
Yeah, say that explicitly. I am qualified to teach American politics because I TA'd it twice, in grad school and yeah.
Thank you.
So we also have a second question, which asks, I wonder how you advise us to prepare for on-campus telephone interviews.
So I can start here. Something that I learned and that folks advised me for quite a bit was to spend some time looking at the faculty. You should receive like a schedule in the days before. So the people who you'll have these 30-minute talks with, like in their offices, especially in on-campus interview, it's going to be like really grueling. It's all day. It's like being shuffled around. So do the best you can, like looking at what people do, looking at what they study, maybe have a question to ask them about their work, because it will be 30 minutes like back and forth. So do your best, but know that in the moment you may forget, and to just like try and go with it and know the questions that you might want to ask. What's it like being in this department? What are sabbaticals like if you're interested? Like, what are the students like? What's a typical semester like, right? Some other practical advice, especially for on-campus interviews, is don't forget to pee. Make sure that you ask for your needs, because folks are just not going to realize that you've been meeting with people since 7:30 in the morning and it's 4 o'clock and you haven't peed. So make sure you advocate for your own needs. Hey, I'm just going to go to the bathroom. I'll be right back. Like, it doesn't need to be a production.
I would add for those meetings, I think have some questions in your back pocket that you're going to ask multiple people. Hearing different people answer the same question can be very informative and useful. So, often you'll get to that last meeting of the day and it's like, so what questions do you have for me? And you're like, well, none, because everyone answered my questions. Just to ask the same questions again. I think one really good question to ask, especially of junior faculty, is just ask them to describe their typical week. And that'll give you a really good feel for the job. It was a bit eye-opening to me when I asked someone that coming here, and what she described is what the typical week is, and it's pretty different from the typical week I had anticipated based on my previous job. So I think that's a good question to ask, and also ask it of several different people, get different takes on what the place is like, what the students are like, what their experience has been. I think also don't go crazy with the research on the people you're meeting. Right? They're not expecting you to remember everything about them or to have read all their work. And so it's totally fine to be like, can you remind me what you work on? I think focus more on how you're going to answer people's questions, questions about your research, questions about and how you do it, questions about your teaching. If you say, going back to the previous question, if you say you're qualified to teach an American politics course and you only have the TA experience, I think be ready to talk about how you would design your own introductory American politics course. And I would really want to hear an answer that's not, well, I would take the syllabus I TA'd for and use that. I want to hear how you're going to put your mark and how you're thinking about the design of a course like that. So I would really just try to anticipate the questions you'll get. And also think about the questions you're going to ask people. Not having questions can be a red flag, right? Shows you haven't really thought much about this place, and you haven't thought about what you want to know about coming here. Maybe you're just not that invested in learning about the job.
And I'll add, because we don't know whether or not we're going to be virtual come, interview time in October and November. The virtual market was very different from the in-person market. So for the virtual market, there's some logistical things that you should remember to do, which is first and foremost, make sure whoever is the department secretary or coordinator, whoever's setting up the job talk, the grad student meeting and your individual meetings, there's one single link and you're not required to click into multiple different ones. Sometimes it will create multiple ones, and then you are late because you don't know which link you're supposed to be at, or other people are late because they thought it was the previous one. So you want to make sure in terms of with virtual, you really have to make sure your logistics on your end is set up, ready to go. And then you also need to somewhat manage what for the various places that you're interviewing, how many links do I have? Who's coming in? Is this going to be open forum, or is this going to be something where it's only going to be an invited number of people? It's just as intensive as in person. I did both. So the in-person ones can actually be a little bit more intensive because you're literally sitting for 8 hours solid, and they give much smaller breaks in between. So advocating for yourself is really important, and making sure that you manage your time, because people will say, it's Zoom, it'll be easy. And then you realize, again, it's 4 o'clock and you've never eaten. And everyone assumes that somewhere in there you've had a chance for a bathroom break, and they didn't. They set up Zoom meetings back to back to back to back to back for you. So you need to really make sure you manage your logistics. Lindsay, I believe you were about to say something.
Yeah, that's all good. Oh, I didn't realize I was still unmuted. Shoot, what was I going to say? I was about to say, about the preparing and doing some research. I think it's good to and have it written down of 2-sentence summary of what some of the person is, and then you can look at it right before you go in. But a mistake that I have made is going overboard with that research, and then talking with them and having it be more about their stuff rather than what I wanted to communicate. And then I felt like, oh wait, I just left there and they don't actually have a really good sense of who I am, besides somebody who is a good conversation partner. And then they don't know my strengths. So think here are the points that I want to make sure somebody or a couple people know this about me, because this is my selling point. Try to make sure that those try to have those go up, and at the same time kind of follow the lead of the person who's doing that. People will talk about different things, and you'll also pick up things from them. And so I'm the person who always asks the diversity questions, in my department. There's certain people who will ask about different sorts of things. And so that's sort of okay, this is where I want to show off this part of me, right, when I'm talking with that person.
So we still have a couple more questions in the queue. Actually, second to last, I believe. Do you think international candidates are disadvantaged anyway in the U.S. job market? Is it anything we need to do differently in our application package?
So I think this will vary across institutions. Different schools have different policies about sponsoring employees for visas. Here at Wabash, we generally will not sponsor a visa for a short-term visitor, but we generally will sponsor a visa for a tenure track hire. And so that I would say if there's a disadvantage, it is in that respect, and that will vary from one institution to the next. There are some that won't do visa sponsorships at all. So I would say that's if there's disadvantage, it's there. As far as anything you need to do differently, I don't know if it's need to do, but something you might think about is kind of how does your, think about, are there ways in which being an international candidate actually is a selling point, right? Speaks to your ability to bring new perspectives to the classroom, or work with international students in particular, or so I think try to make it a selling point. I think that the disadvantage would come from schools' immigration visa policies.
I think this is a potential area, huge area for racism, because a lot of what happens in searches is kind of oh, do they get it? Do they get what we're about? Are they able to communicate their research to this kind of audience? And sometimes this can take the form of, do they know what we're trying to get at when we ask this question? And if somebody doesn't misinterpret what we were trying to get at, some people might take it as a red flag. I think there's a really fraught things, particularly people who didn't do, well, certainly if you didn't do your PhD in the States, because academia in the United States is weird, but if English is not your first language, and some of that I am not saying that that is okay. It is really problematic. And I think that there's a lot of discussions that we need to have about that. Having said that, in terms of what you could do as a candidate, I would do like practice job talks, certainly, but also talk through some interview questions with friends, people who are in the United States. So I'll give an example. So one thing that we have in the past asked is, why do you want to teach at Colby or a place like Colby? And I have seen some international students say like, well, it's a very good school. I bet you have really good students and the teaching load is lower than other places. And it sounds like a really nice job. And like, that actually isn't what the question is getting for. It's like, how are you a good liberal arts college fit? Right. And so I would want to kind of do that, because I think there's all these hidden curriculum things that, yeah, you guys know academia is weird. And then especially if you're not from the US, a lot of things that, even if you know academia is weird, you may even forget some of the hidden curricula that you know. So practice with lots of people for interview questions. That's the only thing I think of.
I would reiterate that. I mean, everyone has a tendency to focus on the job talk in terms of practicing, and then they don't prep for the one-on-one interviews. And that's where you can really crash or burn, because everyone in the department gets to vote on you, at least most of the time. And so you really want to take the time to sit and gather a number of questions that people have seen over the past couple of years. Various listservs that you belong to or organizations will have these things in-house. Ask your professors who are newer assistant professors, what kind of questions they recently got on the market, and they ask those people who've sat on committees, what kind of questions are they anticipating to ask people for the job lines that are coming in, and then sit with your friends and practice that for a while, and then move on to faculty. Ask faculty if you can come and spend a half hour, 45 minutes with them, and just run through your answers and have your answers tight and right. A lot of these interview processes, you need to realize is that, especially virtual ones, short time periods. You're getting like 45 minutes for your job talk, but then you may only have like 20 minutes or 30 minutes with faculty, or they may do a forum where, this happened to me, where there was multiple different people, and so everyone had a short amount of time. Your job is to come across and answer their questions within a very short amount of time. And so the more polished you can be, the better off I think you are. I'm going to go into the Q&A and keep looking.
I want to add to that too, that my first interview was at a Slack school, and my first coffee of the day, which was right before my job talk, he said, like, we got your materials, we read your stuff, like the point of this is not to communicate your research really well. Like, we get it. We want to see how you can communicate, right? Like, the point of this is to bring you here because we think that you're good enough to be here, but we want to see if you make a good colleague. So the point of this is to have these deep conversations and explain who you are and how you contribute to this department, but also that you can communicate well, and that you are going to be a good teacher, right? So some schools, even Slack schools that really emphasize teaching, won't have a separate teaching demo. So your job talk is where you do it. And the meetings are really where you like establish rapport. Communicating who you are is like top tier here, because they've got all your stuff. Like they know who you are on paper. They want to see who you are in person or online, but same thing.
I just put a list of a bunch of questions that we ask for Zoom interviews. I think Zoom interviews, campus visits are so idiosyncratic, but I think Zoom interviews would be where somebody could slip up and do something that could get them axed. And yeah, that's another a teaching failure, what you learn from it. So we give more, we have like one question about research usually, because they're only 30 minutes, it's like nothing. And then most of it is about teaching. And so here are some of the simple questions. Shamira's are also ones that we might include in there. And yeah, I think that a lot of these are fairly standard across places. You should expect to be asked about diversity things, certainly.
Awesome. So we are 15 minutes over time almost. So I want to give everyone the opportunity to copy and paste the questions that the panelists kindly threw in there so that you can take it with you. But I want to thank all of you for hanging in. 17 of you stuck out, 20 of you stuck out with us for an extra 15 minutes. So thank you all so much. And panelists, if you want to put your emails, if you're willing to allow people to contact you into the chat, that's awesome also. Thank you so much for attending. We appreciate it. And we wish you the best of luck on the market. It is a rough thing to go through. We've all done it. And so know that we are rooting for you. Everyone's rooting for you, and you are awesome and you deserve a job. And we hope that this panel helped out in some sort of way. So thank you all very much. And we are going to stop live streaming now. Actually, I don't even know how to do that.